The champagne flute felt cold and unnaturally heavy in my hand, a stark contrast to the practiced warmth of the smile I directed towards the incoming wave of San Francisco's tech and finance elite. The annual Croft Capital Gala, held this year in the glittering ballroom of the Sant. Regis was the undisputed pinnacle of the city's social calendar, and as Sophia Bellwether, wife of the man of the hour, Julian Croft, my role was clear. Be immaculate, be charming, be the perfect unobtrusive accessory to my husband's meteoric rise. Tonight, draped in a midnight blue gown that whispered quiet luxury, I navigated the room with the practiced ease born of years spent honing this performance. I laughed at the right jokes, remembered the names of spouses and children, deftly steered conversations toward Julian's latest successes in the volatile world of fintech. It was a role I played well. The former director of strategy who now primarily strategized seating charts and managed household accounts. Julian liked to say I was his secret weapon in these settings. I often felt more like polished, well-maintained artillery, deployed as needed. "Sophia, darling, you look radiant. Julian is simply conquering the world, isn't he?" gushed Melinda Hayes, wife of a venture capitalist Julian was currently courting. "He certainly works hard," I replied, the automatic response smooth on my tongue. I scanned the room for Julian, spotting him near the stage, holding court, his charisma radiating like a physical force. He thrived in these environments, soaking up the admiration, the power dynamics palpable in the air around him. That magnetic confidence had drawn me in years ago when I was a rising star at a rival firm, before I'd made the questionable decision to trade my own trajectory for a supporting role in his. Just as Melinda launched into a story about her latest trip to Aspen, a distinct shift occurred in the room's energy. A hush fell over the clusters of conversation near the grand entrance. Heads turned, conversations faltered. A collective intake of breath seemed to ripple through the elegantly dressed crowd. I followed their gaze, my polite smile freezing on my face. Standing framed in the arched doorway was Isabel Moreau. Not a ghost, not a memory, but Isabel Moreau in the flesh, the celebrated fiercely independent photojournalist who had vanished without a trace 3 years prior while on assignment in Syria, presumed dead by everyone, including, I had thought, Julian. She looked different, thinner perhaps, a faint scar tracing her temple, her usual bohemian attire replaced by a surprisingly simple but striking black dress. But the intense, intelligent eyes, the air of quiet defiance, that was unmistakably Isabel, the woman Julian had loved with a consuming passion before me, the woman whose disappearance had seemingly shattered him, paving the way, I'd believed, for our own relationship. My blood ran cold. I watched paralyzed as Julian, mid-sentence with the mayor, caught sight of her. His reaction was instantaneous, visceral. The color drained from his face, then rushed back in a sudden flood. His glass slipped from his fingers, shattering unnoticed on the marble floor. He didn't seem to breathe. Then, as if pulled by an invisible cord, he moved towards her, shouldering past startled guests, his eyes locked on her, oblivious to everything else. "Isabel?" He breathed her name, the sound carrying across the now silent ballroom. It wasn't just recognition. It was reverence, disbelief, a raw, naked longing I had never, not once in our 5 years together, heard directed at me. She offered a small, tentative smile, the scar at her temple catching the light. "Hello, Julian. It's been a while." He reached her in 3 long strides and enveloped her in an embrace that was far too tight, far too long for a mere wish acquaintance rediscovered. It was a desperate, possessive claiming. When they finally pulled apart, his hands lingered on her arms, his gaze devouring her face as if trying to memorize every detail, confirm her reality. The entire room watched, captivated by the unexpected drama. I felt invisible, a statue in expensive silk. Eventually, Julian seemed to remember his surroundings, his current life. He reluctantly turned, noticing me standing frozen nearby, his expression shifting rapidly from raw emotion to guarded awkwardness. "Sophia," he said, my name an afterthought, a necessary but inconvenient detail. "This is Isabel Moreau, an old friend, from Stanford." Friend didn't begin to cover it. They had been the couple, intense, brilliant, seemingly destined for greatness together until her disappearance. Isabel turned her sharp gaze towards me. Her handshake was cool, firm. "Sophia, lovely to finally meet you. Julian has mentioned you." Her eyes held a flicker of calculation, assessing me, and the woman who had taken her place. The rest of the gala passed in a blur of forced smiles and strained conversation. Julian kept Isabel close to his side, introducing her with a mixture of pride and possessive bewilderment. The story of her survival, capture, imprisonment, eventual escape circulated in hushed, excited whispers, instantly making her the center of attention, the returning heroine. I played my part, the gracious wife, while silently observing the way Julian's hand kept finding Isabel's back, the shared glances, the unfinished sentences that spoke volumes. Later that night, long after the guests had departed, Julian came into our bedroom. I pretended to be asleep, listening as he paced, checked his phone repeatedly, a low murmur escaping his lips. Isabel's name. He eventually fell into a restless sleep beside me, a stranger radiating a disturbing energy. Unable to sleep, I slipped into the ensuite bathroom. My period was late, something I'd initially dismissed due to stress. But the faint nausea I'd felt for the past week, the unusual fatigue, driven by a sudden, desperate need for certainty about something in my life, I fumbled in the vanity drawer for the pregnancy test I'd bought days ago and hidden, almost afraid to confirm it. I sat on the cold marble floor, waiting, the silence broken only by the sound of Julian murmuring Isabel's name in his sleep from the next room. Slowly, undeniably, 2 pink lines appeared. Pregnant. Our child. A wave of dizziness washed over me. This should have been a moment of joy, of shared hope. Instead, it felt like a complication, a vulnerability, a secret I now had to guard fiercely. Clutching the positive test, listening to my husband whisper another woman's name, I felt utterly, terrifyingly alone. The following days were a master class in dissociation. Julian was physically present, but emotionally light years away, his energy entirely consumed by Isabel's reappearance. He was distracted, euphoric, making hushed phone calls, canceling meetings with flimsy excuses. He attributed my quietness to post-gala fatigue. The confirmations of my deepest fears came that Friday. Julian claimed he had an all-day strategic off-site meeting. Suspicious, I checked the location-sharing app we occasionally used, something he'd likely forgotten about in his distraction. His phone pinged not at a conference center, but at a sleek, ultra-modern high-rise condo building in Pacific Heights. A building I knew he'd admire, but we'd never discuss seriously. Later, driven by a cold dread, I used my knowledge of his tendency towards predictable passwords, old pet names, significant dates before me, and accessed his personal cloud storage account online. My background was in strategy, after all, and I knew how to find information. Tucked away in a mislabeled folder were drafts of separation agreements heavily favoring him, financial projections showing drastically reduced support if I were employed versus unemployed, notes from calls with a notoriously aggressive divorce attorney specializing in high asset cases, and then, the most chilling file, custody strategy, SCB. My initials. It outlined potential tactics, questioning my emotional stability, prone to anxiety, difficulty coping with pressure, highlighting my lack of current employment as a sign of financial dependence, leveraging a clause in our vague prenup that penalized the party initiating divorce. He was planning not just to leave me, but to potentially strip me of assets and fight for primary custody, painting me as unfit, all while knowing, or perhaps because he suspected, I might be pregnant. The casual cruelty, the meticulous planning, it was breathtaking. He wasn't just leaving me for Isabel. He was preparing to dismantle my life with the same ruthless efficiency he applied to hostile takeovers. The positive pregnancy test felt like a lead weight in my purse. This wasn't just about a broken heart anymore. This was about survival. Mine and my unborn child's. Running home to my sister Olivia wouldn't work. Julian's reach was too long. I needed professional help, someone who understood high-stakes battles and could operate outside conventional channels. My mind raced, recalling whispers from years ago, a contact mentioned by a former colleague who had gone through a nightmare divorce. David Chen, a lawyer known for handling difficult situations, disappearances. Sitting alone in my perfectly decorated, utterly cold marital home, I made the call that would change everything. "Mr. Chen," I said, my voice low and steady when he answered, "my name is Sophia Bellwether-Croft. I believe I may require your specialized services." David Chen's office wasn't listed in any legal directory I could find online. The address he gave me over the encrypted messaging app led to a nondescript rare bookstore in a quiet corner of North Beach. A coded phrase whispered to the elderly proprietor granted me access to a private back room, sparsely furnished but equipped with sophisticated communication jammers. Chen himself was compact, sharp-eyed, radiating an aura of intense competence and absolute discretion. He listened without interruption as I laid out the situation, Julian's rekindled obsession with Isabel Moreau, the discovered plans for a financially crippling divorce and custody battle, the prenup trap, and finally the secret I clutched closest, my pregnancy. He reviewed the copies of Julian's documents I'd managed to photograph, his expression grim. "Standard playbook for high net worth, high control divorces," he stated flatly when I finished. "He's boxing you in. The prenup penalty for filing first, the manufactured narrative of instability, the hidden asset transfers. With his resources and connections fighting this conventionally in a California court, you'd be bled dry financially and emotionally, and he'd likely still get favorable custody terms, painting you as the erratic spouse who couldn't cope." "So what are my options?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly despite my resolve. "Phew," Chen admitted bluntly. "You could stay, fight a losing battle, and hope a judge sees through his manipulations, which is unlikely given his influence. Or," he paused, his gaze locking onto mine, "you leverage the one advantage you currently possess. He doesn't know about the child, and he doesn't know you know his full plan. You disappear. Completely. Create a new life before he can implement his transition strategy." And disappear. The word hung in the air, both terrifying and strangely liberating. Is that even possible? Legal? "Legality exists in shades of gray, Mrs. Croft," Chen replied smoothly. "Disappearing isn't inherently illegal. Establishing a new identity without leaving traceable footprints requires specialized resources. My network facilitates such transitions for clients in extreme circumstances, escaping abusive spouses, protected witnesses, individuals whose powerful enemies pose an existential threat. It's complex, requires absolute discipline, and carries significant risks. But it might be the only way to guarantee your safety and your child's future free from Julian's control." He outlined the process, creating a new, verifiable identity. Sophie Bernard sounded plausible, retaining a familiar rhythm, liquidating accessible personal assets into untraceable forms, establishing secure offshore banking, creating a believable cover story, and professional background. My fluency in French and Italian was a key asset here, freelance translator. Choosing a destination far removed from Julian's sphere of influence, Lisbon, Portugal was recommended for its relative anonymity, beauty, and lower cost of living. And finally executing a multi-stage departure designed to obscure my trail, all while maintaining a facade of complete normalcy until the last possible moment. "He thinks you're manageable, predictable," Chen emphasized. "That's your greatest weapon right now. You must play the part of the slightly anxious, perhaps depressed, but ultimately compliant wife, right up until you vanish." Looking at the cold calculations in Julian's divorce strategy notes, thinking of the daughter growing inside me, the choice felt less like a choice and more like a survival imperative. "I'll do it," I said, my voice firm. The next 3 weeks were the most harrowing performance of my life. By day, I was Sophia Bellwether Croft, attending obligatory charity luncheons, discussing guest lists for upcoming corporate events, playing the supportive spouse. I feigned anxiety, citing the stress of Isabel's return and Julian's preoccupation as the reason for my low mood, which Julian readily accepted, likely relieved I wasn't causing more direct conflict. By night or during stolen hours while Julian was at the office, I executed Chen's intricate plan. Small, seemingly random cash withdrawals from my personal savings account, never exceeding ATM limits, deposited into a new account Chen's network had opened for Sophie Bernard through an anonymous trust structure. Selling off jewelry Julian had gifted me, pieces I now loathed, through discreet online dealers, converting the funds into cryptocurrency, then back into euros in Sophie Bernard's offshore account. Scanning every important personal document, birth certificate, passport, university degrees, medical records, including the initial confirmations of my pregnancy, onto encrypted drives, wiping the originals from shared devices. I meticulously created the wellness retreat cover story. I researched silent meditation centers in remote Arizona, fabricated a convincing email confirmation chain, and left it open on my laptop for Julian to accidentally see. "Thinking of going away for a bit?" he asked casually one evening, glancing at the screen. "Feeling overwhelmed?" "Just need to clear my head," I murmured, affecting a fragile tone. With Isabel back and everything, it's been a lot. Good idea, he said distractedly, already scrolling through his own phone. Take the time you need. 2 weeks, right? Should do you good? His utter lack of genuine concern, his relief at my impending absence, was another small twist of the knife, but it also confirmed Chen's assessment. He saw me as manageable, predictable, an emotional inconvenience easily dealt with by a spot retreat. During this time, I continued gathering evidence. Julian, confident in my supposed ignorance and preoccupied with Isabel, became careless. I accessed shared calendars, finding appointments with his aggressive divorce attorney. I overheard snippets of hushed phone calls discussing asset protection strategies. I even found draft emails outlining severance terms for me, should I become uncooperative. Each piece of information was saved, encrypted, added to the digital dossier that would be my insurance policy. One calculated risk I took was during a brief, tense visit with my mother-in-law, Eleanor Croft. We were having tea in her impeccable Pacific Heights drawing room. Knowing her cool demeanor and subtle influence, I tested the waters, not revealing my plan, but expressing carefully worded anxieties. Julian seems different since Isabel returned, I ventured, stirring my tea. So focused on her, on the future. Sometimes I worry he's making rash decisions, not thinking clearly about the long-term implications, for the family, for the company's reputation. Eleanor observed me over the rim of her teacup, her expression unreadable. Julian has always been driven, Sophia, she replied evenly, and Isabel's return has certainly been disruptive, but Julian ultimately knows what is best for Croft Capital. A standard defense of her son. But then she added, almost as an afterthought, her gaze sharpening slightly, however, ambition should always be tempered with prudence, and loyalty should never be taken for granted. It wasn't much. A cryptic platitude, perhaps. But the way she said loyalty, the slight emphasis, the direct look she gave me, it felt like a signal. A subtle acknowledgement that she wasn't entirely blind to Julian's behavior, or perhaps even to Isabel's potential threat. I didn't push further, but I stored that moment away. Eleanor Croft was a formidable woman. Having her even passively disapprove of Julian's current trajectory could be advantageous down the line. Finally, all the pieces were in place. Julian confirmed his departure date for a major fintech conference in Tokyo. A trip I knew from his hidden calendar now included Isabel, booked in the adjoining suite. My own multi-leg flight itinerary to Lisbon, booked under Sophie Bernard via different travel agencies using funds from the offshore account, was finalized. My untraceable go bag containing essentials, cash, encrypted drives, and the new identity documents was hidden in a locker at the ferry building. David Chen confirmed his network had arranged secure temporary accommodation for me upon arrival in Lisbon. The night before Julian left for Tokyo, he was almost buoyant, relieved perhaps that my retreat coincided with his trip, simplifying logistics. He spoke vaguely of needing to restructure some things upon his return, his eyes avoiding mine. He gave me a perfunctory kiss on the cheek before turning towards his suitcase. Have a relaxing time, Sophia. Clear your head. You too, Julian, I replied, my voice betraying nothing. Have a successful trip. As I lay awake long after he fell asleep, one hand resting protectively on my still flat stomach, I felt a terrifying calm. Tomorrow, Sophia Bellwether Croft would cease to exist. Tomorrow, Sophie Bernard and her unborn daughter would begin their escape. The intricate dance of my escape unfolded with nerve-wracking precision. Julian left for Tokyo before dawn, oblivious. Hours later, after a final, tearful, and deliberately vague goodbye call to my sister Olivia, I walked out of the opulent San Francisco apartment I'd once called home, carrying only the untraceable go-bag. A pre-booked car service, paid in cash via an intermediary, took me not to SFO but to Oakland International. My first flight under Sophie Bernard was to Vancouver. From there, a separate booking to Amsterdam, followed by a final short hop to Lisbon on a different European carrier. Each leg was designed to break the chain, obscure the trail, funded by the carefully laundered assets David Chen's network had secured. Landing in Lisbon felt like stepping onto another planet. The centuries-old tiled buildings, the melancholic strains of fado music drifting from hidden cafes, the unfamiliar cadence of Portuguese. It was overwhelming, disorienting, yet undeniably liberating. Chen's network had arranged a small, discreetly located furnished apartment in the Alfama district. For the first few weeks, I barely left it. existing in a state of hypervigilance, jumping at every unfamiliar sound, half expecting Julian's face to appear around every corner. Slowly, cautiously, I began to build a life as Sophie Bernard. I obtained local residency documents, opened a Portuguese bank account, secured a local phone number. My fluent French and Italian, combined with the fabricated translation portfolio Chen's people provided, allowed me to pick up remote freelance work, translating business documents and marketing materials for international clients. The pay wasn't extravagant, but combined with the funds I had managed to extract before leaving, it was enough to live modestly, carefully. My world shrank, intentionally. My focus narrowed to two things: my freelance work, conducted entirely online under encrypted channels, and my rapidly growing belly. Loneliness was a constant companion, a dull ache for the easy camaraderie with my sister, even the familiar routine of my old life, minus Julian. But the fear was a stronger motivator. I avoided expat communities, kept social interactions superficial, scrubbed any trace of Sophia Bellwether-Croft from the internet, a ghost in the digital machine. 6 months after arriving in Lisbon, Chloe was born. Holding my daughter, so tiny, so perfect, so utterly dependent on me, solidified my resolve. Every sacrifice, every risk was worth it to protect her from the toxic legacy of her father. She became my universe. Her first smile, her first steps on the uneven cobblestone streets, the way she'd babble happily in a mixture of English and nascent Portuguese, these were the anchors grounding Sophie Bernard's existence. We lived quietly for nearly 2 years. Lisbon, with its gentle pace and accepting atmosphere, began to feel like home. I found a small group of other mothers at a local park, exchanging parenting tips and navigating the challenges of raising a child alone in a foreign country, careful never to reveal too much about my past. I watched Chloe blossom, a bright, curious child seemingly untouched by the shadows I carried. I deliberately avoided news from San Francisco. Checking up on Julian felt like poking a sleeping dragon. My only contact was a quarterly, heavily encrypted check-in with David Chen's office, confirming my continued safety and receiving assurance that Julian's search efforts, while ongoing, had yielded no concrete leads on my whereabouts. Then one sun-drenched afternoon, while enjoying pastries at a small cafe near the Castelo de São Jorge, Chloe happily feeding crumbs to the pigeons, my carefully constructed anonymity shattered. "Sophia? Sophia Bellwether? Is that really you?" The voice, unmistakably American, laced with disbelief, cut through the peaceful ambience. I looked up, my blood turning to ice. Standing a few feet away, looking equally stunned, was Marcus Bell, Julian's former VP, the man who had sat through countless board meetings with me, who had occasionally joined Julian and me for awkward corporate dinners. My first instinct was to grab Chloe and run, but years of strategic thinking kicked in. Denial, plausibility. "I'm sorry," I said, forcing a polite, confused smile, hoping my Portuguese-inflected English sounded convincing enough. "You must have me mistaken for someone else. My name is Sophie Bernard." Marcus's brow furrowed. He stepped closer, his eyes scanning my face, then flicking down to Chloe, whose dark, curly hair and determined chin were miniature echoes of Julian's features. "No," he said slowly, shaking his head. I know it's you, Sophia. I worked with Julian for 5 years. What are you doing here? Everyone thinks of..." He trailed off, looking genuinely bewildered. Caught. My mind raced. Running would only confirm his suspicion. I needed to control the narrative quickly. "Mr. Bell," I said, my tone shifting, becoming cooler, more guarded. "It's been a long time. Yes, I live here now, with my daughter." I deliberately didn't offer explanations. Marcus seemed to register my defensiveness. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, Sophie, I'm not here to cause trouble, I swear. I left Croft Capital almost a year ago. Things had got untenable. With Julian. That caught my attention." "What happened?" He glanced around the cafe patio before pulling up a chair, uninvited, lowering his voice. "The whole place is under federal investigation. Securities fraud, embezzlement, the works. It started unraveling about 6 months after you left. Julian's become completely paranoid, erratic. He blames everyone but himself." Marcus leaned in slightly. "And Sophia? He's obsessed with finding you. He's spent a fortune on private investigators across Europe. He's telling anyone who will listen, including the feds, that you disappeared under suspicious circumstances, possibly kidnapped by rivals, maybe even implying you were involved in the financial irregularities and fled. Kidnapped. Involved in the fraud. The narrative Julian was spinning was even more dangerous than I'd imagined. He wasn't just trying to find me. He was trying to incriminate me, perhaps to deflect blame from himself or simply out of spite. "Why are you telling me this, Marcus?" I asked, my voice tight. He looked genuinely pained. "Because it's wrong. What he did to you, what he's doing now, it's not right. And because..." He hesitated, glancing at Chloe, who was now trying to climb onto my lap. "He's making Chloe's existence public in his search, framing it as a desperate father looking for his kidnapped child. It's putting you both at risk in ways he probably doesn't even care about." The carefully built walls around my quiet Lisbon life crumbled. Julian hadn't given up. He was using his legal troubles, twisting my disappearance into something sinister, leveraging our daughter to hunt me down. My anonymity was gone. The relative peace I'd found felt like a fragile illusion about to shatter. Running wasn't an option anymore. David Chen was right. It was time to control the narrative. Marcus Bell's revelation left me reeling. Julian had just moved on. He had twisted my desperate act of self-preservation into a sinister narrative, painting himself as the grieving father of a kidnapped child, while simultaneously facing federal fraud charges. The irony would have been laughable if the implications weren't so terrifying. He was using our daughter, Chloe, as a shield and a weapon, putting us both directly in the crosshairs of international attention and his own unraveling desperation. Staying hidden in Lisbon was no longer an option. It inadvertently played into his fabricated victimhood. Paradoxically, the safest move now was to step back into the light, but entirely on my own terms. That evening, after Chloe was asleep, I initiated the secure communication protocol David Chen had established for emergencies. Within minutes, his encrypted reply came through. I laid out the situation. Marcus Bell's chance encounter, Julian's kidnapping narrative, the federal investigation. Chen's response was immediate and decisive. Return is now strategically imperative. His kidnapping claim loses all credibility if you reappear voluntarily. His legal jeopardy gives you leverage. We control the narrative now. Await instructions. While Chen began coordinating the complex logistics of my return, I took another calculated risk. Using a secure, anonymous email address Chen had provided long ago, I sent a simple, untraceable message to a private account I knew belonged to my mother-in-law, Eleanor Croft. It contained only my current Sophie Bernard contact number and 3 words: "Chloe is safe." I didn't know if she would respond or how. Would she alert Julian? Or would the subtle signal I thought I detected in her eyes during our last tea meeting prove true? The encrypted reply came less than an hour later. "I know. Have suspected Lisbon for months. Assumed you'd surface when the time was right. Julian's search has been extensive, but ultimately fruitless, partly due to certain discreet inquiries being rerouted. He is currently under house arrest, ankle monitor, pending trial. His legal team is scrambling. What do you need?" Discreet inquiries rerouted. She had been helping, subtly hindering Julian's search from the inside. The confirmation sent a jolt through me, a strange mix of vindication and apprehension. Eleanor Croft was playing a long game, and her motives remained opaque, likely centered more on protecting the family name and her granddaughter than any real affection for me. But right now, her interests aligned with mine. I outlined Chen's plan: my voluntary return to San Francisco, the need for absolute security upon arrival, and the intention to negotiate custody and finalize the divorce from a position of strength, using the evidence I possessed in Julian's current legal predicament. Eleanor's reply was swift, sensible. My personal security detail will handle airport extraction and transport to a secure private residence, not the family home. Safer for you and Chloe. Provide Chen with your itinerary. I will handle Julian's awareness. His lawyers will be informed you are returning voluntarily to address custody, citing his legal issues as a destabilizing factor requiring your presence. This frames you as the responsible parent acting in the child's best interest. We meet when you arrive." Just like that, the formidable Eleanor Croft became an unlikely, powerful ally. Her motives might be complex, but her efficiency was undeniable. The return journey was the inverse of my escape. Less about frantic secrecy, more about controlled, secure movement. Chen booked the flights, again through a multi-leg route, but this time coordinated with Eleanor's security team. We traveled to Sophia and Chloe Bernardton until the final leg into SFO, where diplomatic channels were subtly employed, a favor called in by Eleanor, no doubt, to bypass standard customs and immigration checks. As the plane descended towards the familiar curve of the San Francisco Bay, I held Chloe close, pointing out the Golden Gate Bridge shrouded in fog. "We're going on a new adventure, sweetie," I whispered, more for my own benefit than hers. She just nodded, already engrossed in her coloring book. Two stone-faced men in discreet suits met us directly at the gate, whisking us through private corridors and into a waiting black SUV with tinted windows. No paparazzi alerted by Julian's kidnapped child story. No investigators waiting. Just quiet competence. They drove us not to an anonymous safe house, but to a beautiful secluded guest house on a large estate in Atherton, presumably one of Eleanor's properties. It was luxurious, secure, and utterly private. David Chen arrived an hour later. "Welcome back, Sophia," he said, using my real name for the first time since Lisbon. "Eleanor has everything handled on her end. Julian's lawyers were informed this morning of your voluntary return to resolve custody matters amicably. They were surprised, to say the least. It completely undermines his narrative." We spent the rest of the day preparing. Chen had already received the encrypted drives I'd sent ahead. We reviewed the evidence. Julian's divorce and custody strategy documents, the financial records hinting at impropriety, which likely formed part of the federal case against him, the ultrasound photo I'd left behind. We also reviewed the file Eleanor had anonymously sent me in Lisbon, damning evidence of coordinated securities fraud between Julian and Isabel Moreau. Eleanor playing both sides, Chen mused, looking at the file she'd sent me. Protecting her granddaughter by giving you leverage against her own son. Fascinating woman. She protects the Croft legacy above all, I clarified. Julian's actions threaten that. Regardless, Chen said, this significantly strengthens our position. Julian is radioactive right now. His priority will be minimizing damage in his criminal case. He can't afford a messy public custody battle, especially with you holding evidence of his initial intent and potential involvement in the fraud alongside Isabel. Our strategy was clear. Demand Julian publicly retract any insinuation of kidnapping. Secure sole legal and primary physical custody of Chloe for me. Establish supervised visitation for Julian, contingent on his behavior and the outcome of his legal case. Negotiate a fair divorce settlement based on assets before his likely conviction, using the prenup's invalidity due to his actions, and the fraud evidence as a leverage. The meeting is set for tomorrow, 10 a.m., neutral territory, a conference suite at the Four Seasons. Chen confirmed. Julian will be there with his lawyer and his federal marshal escort. Eleanor will not be present. She feels her role now is behind the scenes. He looked at me seriously. Are you ready for this, Sophia? Ready? After 2 years of looking over my shoulder, of living a borrowed life, of protecting my daughter from the fallout of her father's choices. I thought of Chloe sleeping peacefully in the next room, oblivious to the legal and emotional storm surrounding her. Yes, I was more than ready. I wasn't the scared, fleeing wife anymore. I was a mother protecting her child, armed with the truth, and finally ready to reclaim my name. The conference suite at the Four Seasons felt sterile, impersonal, a world away from the sun-drenched quiet of my Lisbon apartment. David Chen sat beside me, calm and prepared, while two members of Eleanor's discreet security team stood unobtrusively near the door. Chloe was safely back at the Atherton guest house with a trusted nanny recommended by Eleanor. Bringing her here felt unnecessary, provocative even. This negotiation was about securing her future, not exposing her to the wreckage of her parents' past. Julian arrived precisely at 10 a.m., flanked by his high-powered attorney and a stolid federal marshal who looked utterly bored by the proceedings. The change in Julian was stark. The confident swagger, the easy charisma that had once captivated boardrooms and charmed investors, was gone. He looked gaunt, his expensive suit hanging slightly loose on his frame. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and the barely concealed electronic monitor strapped to his ankle was a visible symbol of his fall from the grace. His eyes locked onto mine as he entered. There was a flicker of something. Shock, resentment, perhaps even a ghost of the man I once knew, before his expression settled into a carefully guarded neutrality. He nodded curtly, avoiding my name, and took his seat opposite me. David Chen began, his voice steady and professional, laying out our terms without preamble. He spoke of my voluntary return to address custody matters in light of Julian's unforeseen legal entanglements. He referenced the documentation confirming my status as Chloe's primary caregiver prior to my departure. He outlined our proposal, sole legal and primary physical custody for me, A structured, initially supervised visitation schedule for Julian, contingent upon the resolutions of his criminal case and demonstrated stability, a demand for an immediate public retraction of any statements or implications suggesting kidnapping or voluntary abandonment, and a swift, equitable division of marital assets based on documentation predating his alleged fraudulent activities, explicitly noting the invalidity of the prenup clause given his actions. Julian's lawyer, a sharp-faced woman named Harding, attempted to push back, citing Julian's rights as a father and questioning the abruptness of my departure. Chen countered coolly, referencing the evidence of Julian's own planned divorce strategy, his documented intent to challenge my fitness as a mother, and the evidence of his relationship with Isabel Moreau. He didn't even need to explicitly mention the fraud case or the materials Eleanor had provided. The implication hung heavy in the air. Julian's leverage was non-existent. Throughout the exchange, Julian remained mostly silent, his jaw tight, staring down at the polished table. Only when Chen mentioned the supervised visitation did he flinch, looking up at me directly for the first time, his eyes pleading. "Sophia, Chloe needs stability and safety," I interrupted, my voice quiet but firm, meeting his gaze without wavering. "Something you haven't been able to provide, Julian, not then, and certainly not now." He recoiled as if struck. Harding quickly interjected, steering the conversation back to financial terms. But the fight seemed to go out of him after that. He knew he was cornered. His empire was crumbling, his freedom was curtailed, and his attempt to control the narrative of our separation had backfired spectacularly. Facing potential jail time for fraud, a protracted and ugly public custody battle was the last thing he needed. By lunchtime, they had agreed to essentially all our terms. A joint statement would be issued retracting any kidnapping narrative. I would have sole custody, with Julian granted supervised visits twice a month at a neutral location, once his house arrest permitted. The asset division would proceed based on records predating the investigation, expedited through arbitration. As the lawyers finalized the wording, Julian looked across the table at me, the arrogance replaced by a weary emptiness. "Was any of it real, Sophia?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Between us?" I considered the question, the years of shared life, the moments of genuine connection buried beneath the ambition and deceit. "I thought it was," I answered honestly. "For a long time, I truly believed it was. That's the tragedy, Julian. You had something real, and you threw it away chasing shadows." He didn't reply, just looked down at his hands. There was nothing more to say. The following month saw the swift dismantling of Julian Croft's world. The divorce was finalized quickly. The joint statement clearing my name was released, citing irreconcilable differences and confirming my role as primary custodian by mutual agreement. Julian, facing overwhelming evidence in the federal case, likely bolstered by Isabel Moreau cutting her own deal, pleaded guilty to several counts of securities fraud and conspiracy. He avoided a long prison sentence but received hefty fines, probation, a permanent ban from the securities industry, and several months of house arrest. Croft Capital was dissolved, its assets liquidated. Isabel Moreau, after testifying against Julian, received a lighter sentence and promptly disappeared from public view. Eleanor Croft, true to her word, ensured Chloe and I were financially secure, overseeing the asset division and establishing a substantial trust for Chloe using separate Croft family funds and untouched by Julian's scandal. Her way of preserving the legacy Julian had tarnished. She never explicitly discussed her motives for helping me beyond protecting Chloe, and I never asked. Ours was an alliance born of necessity, underscored by a complex, unspoken understanding. I chose not to return to San Francisco permanently. The city held too many ghosts. Instead, after spending some time with my sister Olivia to decompress, I decided to relocate to Vienna, Austria. A city rich in culture, far removed from the tech and finance world, a place where Sophie Bernard, the freelance translator and single mother, could seamlessly become Sophia Bellwether, strategic consultant, building a new, quieter life. I established my own consultancy, leveraging my strategic background to advise European firms on cross-cultural marketing and ethical business practices. Chloe thrived in the international school, quickly picking up German, her laughter echoing in our sunlit Altbau apartment. Julian maintained supervised visitation, flying to Vienna every few months. The visits were polite, strained, focused entirely on Chloe. He looked like a man hollowed out, the driving ambition replaced by a quiet resignation. He was paying his dues, financially and emotionally. Whether he ever truly understood the depth of his betrayal, I didn't know, but he treated me with a distant respect now. The power dynamic irrevocably shifted. Sometimes looking out over the elegant rooftops of Vienna, watching Chloe practice piano, I felt a pang for the life I'd once envisioned, but it was fleeting. The peace I felt now was real, hard-won, entirely my own. I'd navigated the wreckage, protected my daughter, and emerged not unscathed, but whole. The future wasn't a predetermined path dictated by someone else's ambition, but an open horizon waiting for me and Chloe to write our own story. The arrangement was over. My real life had begun.